First of all, I'd just like to thank the college for the opportunity, I suppose, to come along today and have a chat and tell us a little bit about the world of MAIC and our role in road safety. So first of all, just a bit of background around MAIC. Some people may not be familiar, and if people are, it's a good opportunity to reacquaint yourself anyway. So MAIC, we're the regulator of Queensland's compulsory third-party scheme. Personal injury, we're established in 1994, and actually next month we'll be actually having our 30th anniversary. So we'll be doing a fair bit of reminiscing about some old times, which has been good in regards to putting this together today. We're established under the Motor Accident Insurance Act. We're a statutory authority and based within Queensland Treasury. We're Queensland's fault-based personal injury scheme, and with a lot of other schemes and jurisdictions are set up in different ways. Within Queensland, we are fault-based, whereas someone like the TAC, for example, in Victoria, they are no fault-based, which means that anyone who's injured in an accident is liable. We'll talk about that a bit later. And as you can see, CTP provides coverage for those injured in a crash through no fault of their own. And a good example there is, say, single vehicle crashes usually aren't eligible unless a passenger or a third party, such as a pedestrian, are injured, and they can make a claim in a single vehicle crash. CTP premiums are payable as part of the vehicle registration process. CTP premiums differ according to the type of vehicle being registered, and in Queensland we have up to 26 vehicle classes. Most people, I think about 60% of vehicles which are registered are basically your standard car or station wagon. They're a Class 1 vehicle. And for point of reference, the current Class 1 premium for 12 months is around $369, which when you compare it across other jurisdictions, Queensland, it's the second most affordable premium in Australia, which is a very good outcome. And obviously, being a compulsory product, it's important that it remains affordable for everybody. Just some more information around MAIC and our role as a regulator. So it involves licensing and supervising the CTP insurers. So in Queensland at the moment we have 3 CTP insurers who basically receive the claims and process them through. We monitor the scheme, we fix the premium ceiling and floor. So what that basically means is that as a regulator we have control over, we use actuarial analysis control over the premium. So the insurers basically have to fall within that particular premium, and that's one of the reasons why CTP, it doesn't go up as much, as it gives us some control over those increases. When you think about home and contents, and you think about comprehensive car insurance, you think about your private health insurance, they're always sort of going up with indexation, whereas thankfully we're able to keep CTP premiums fairly stable. MAIC sets the levies and fees to support the scheme. Self-interest is a very important motivator, as I always say. So to me, this next one is the most important: promoting research, education and infrastructure to mitigate road trauma. We also look at claims and insurance policy, data collection and analytics. Obviously compensate people who have been injured through the result of negligent driving or unidentified motor vehicle through the nominal defendant. And we also administer the nominal defendant and motor accident insurance funds. So just a bit into the data and a bit of background before we sort of get into our program. So the graph there on the left is looking at CTP claims per year from 2020 per quarter. And you can see there per quarter we're sort of sitting at between the 1,500 and the 2,000 claims a quarter, and what that equates to on average in the last 3 years, we get about 7,500 claims through our scheme. So that's 7,500 people who are being injured through no fault of their own. When we look at the, I suppose, the role of claimant, about 83% of it is 61% is the driver, 21% is the passenger. So about 83% are made up of the driver and the passenger. Motorcycles are about 6%, and then we have the others, pedestrians, bicycles, and others make up the remainder. When we look at crash type, day and age, and looking at people here who make a claim, who are injured. So this graph is looking at from from sort of Monday to Sunday, and you can see our peak period in regards to crashes that result in a claim is that afternoon period. So, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from that 3 to 6 p.m. And you also see the darker colour, the more sort of claims that are occurring. It's also, it makes sense, it's that 6 to 9 a.m. in the morning period as well. In regards to, you can't see that well, the thing, but in regards to the type of crashes that we have, so 52% of crashes resulting in a claim are the same directional rear end crashes. So it's a massive issue for us in the scheme, and we'll see later on the sort of injuries that we get. 21% happen in intersections. In regards, when we look at the at-fault driver profile, so it's young drivers, so the zero to zero, but it'd be the 16 to 24. When we look at those at fault, obviously we've got some people who are unlicensed who and have injury and claim, which goes through the scheme, but really that 16 to 24 makes up about 28%. They're at fault in 28% of crashes resulting in CTP. So obviously young drivers remain the focus area for us. So on to MAIC's Research and Grants program. It's a proactive approach to contribute to reducing both claim frequency and costs in our scheme. Our priority setting is basically based on addressing those two factors. As a compulsory product, it's essential that CTP premiums remain affordable and good value for money, whilst ensuring that claimants receive access to appropriate treatment and support to maximise their recovery. And the graph down here depicts what we call the affordability index. And so basically under our legislation, it's based on class 1 premiums and it's based on average weekly earnings in Queensland. And so what we basically say, if we get to the point where so at the moment we have 21% average weekly earnings, 21% is looking at that is made up of that class 1 premium when you look at it proportionally. If we got to 45%, that would under our legislation that would trigger a scheme review, which basically means that the product's becoming unaffordable. So we would need to do something about the scheme. So as you can see at the moment, and I'm pleased to say, probably over the last 5 years, been very little change in this law. And when we think about the environment we're doing at the moment, it's cost of living pressures. The 21% shows that the scheme represents good value for money and remains. So MAIC's role in road safety, we have a legislative function under the Motor Accident Insurance Act, Section 10, to invest in activities. Today we're focused on the road safety side of our program, but we also have look at injury management and rehabilitation, but I haven't really focused on that today. We also have a legislative function in that area as well. And you can see there's a lot of different issues that we look at through our program. So young drivers, older drivers, rear enders, I mentioned before, tailgating, impaired driving, speed run, regional drivers, autonomous and cooperative vehicles and technology that we use, the heavy vehicles, motorcycles, taxis, rideshare, and obviously all road users. Over the last 5 to 7 years, it's fair to say our program has diversified. So probably prior to that, we were really research focused, but as we'll sort of go through, we diversified our approach, probably a bit like think about a good superannuation fund, where they look at what they're investing in, they look at looking at different things. That's the approach that we try to adopt. And looking at different ways, I think in road safety, we always have to look at different ways and different approaches to try and get better results and get better outcomes. So over the last 5 to 7 years, our programs, there's a number of new groups that have been established. We established the University of Sunshine Coast Road Safety Collaboration in 2019. We established the Road Safety Data Bureau at TMR. We've got the MAIC QUT Data Linkage Fellowship with Dr. Angela Watson. And we've also established the Jamison Trauma Institute, which whilst it's focused on trauma management and road trauma, is also heavily involved in enhancing data linkage, and we'll sort of touch on that a little bit later in some of the other slides. We've also funded a number of specific projects with some new partners. We'll go into this a little bit more detail. The Queensland Trucking Association. We've established some relationships with local government councils. We partnered with RACQ on a driver distraction campaign. We did a BMA BMA Rear Enders campaign was a company called Behaviour Innovation, and we've also partnered with the Department of Justice for the first time. Another significant achievement or expansion of our program is becoming the main funder of Breaking the Cycle program with MAIC, and it really allowing that program to operate on a statewide level, and we'll talk about that further later on, the benefits of that program. We've also recently expanded our funding into Changing Gears, which is the First People's adaptation of that program. Well, research has always, as I mentioned earlier, research has always been a fundamental part of MAIC's investment in road safety. We know that research plays a vital role. Appreciating the converter was in this room, provides that evidence base with road safety policy and practice. And there's many important interventions that have been formulated based on advice from MAIC's funded research centre. And if you haven't ever been in the CASQ boardroom, you'll see on there, up on the walls, the many initiatives they've contributed to in Queensland in road safety over 28 years at such. The other important thing around our funding is we look at it as attracting and retaining appropriate expertise in road safety research. And MAIC's funded researchers bring a level of independence to road safety discussion and are often sought out by media. And we often see, the Department of Transport and Main Roads, their minister often calls upon the director of CASQ, someone from the Sunny Coast Uni, to basically be at meetings with them to provide that independent perspective. It's not just coming from government, it's coming from universities and knowledge. So our two main centres, we've obviously had CASQ. It's been a 28-year relationship established here at QUT. The number of interventions that CASQ have contributed to, you think about the young driver space, motorcycles, the 1 metre rule of cycles, and many more that basically CASQ have been formed out. The alcohol interlocks, the drink driving, the initial RBT work around that. It's been fundamental to the policy that's operating and has continued to be expanded. You also think about some of the people who have come through CASQ and the roles that they've occupied in TMR, in government, internationally as well, and the contributions that they've made to road safety on a global scale. As I mentioned earlier, the University of Sunshine Coast Road Safety Collaboration, established in 2018, and that collaboration has been highly successful. It's specialised in the impaired driving space, but I think one of the success stories around it has been bringing in that next generation of road safety people. They really, I think, they brought a lot of people from that local area, and they're based in a regional area. And we've got Verity sitting on, embarrassed sitting in the audience today, but that's an example of that. And I think it's been really successful. And one of the things that was great last year when we went to we had the annual Road Safety Conference in Cairns, the Australasian College Road Safety Conference. I think there was about 25 researchers from Queensland, so either from CASQ or from Sunshine Coast, who presented on the day. And I presented over the days, and we saw just that core of young people coming through, which I think is a really important thing for road safety research going. So have a look at also MAIC's role, I suppose, in our collaborations. And so when you think about MAIC, I suppose we aren't the lead agency. We're not one of the lead agencies for road safety, so we really have to work closely with those two agencies, with TMR and police. And I suppose sometimes I like to think about it is MAIC is that little brother to TMR and police. And I hope we're the good version of the little brother, not the annoying one. Having two younger brothers myself can be a bit of a mission. So in regards to some of the TMR collaborations that we've had recently, MAIC provided some funding to introduce the new hazard perception test for new learner drivers in Queensland. We provided money for the driver distraction consultancy, and that was a couple of years ago now, and that led to the introduction of the mobile phone and seatbelt enforcement cameras. We funded some research which looked into enhancing the drink driving penalties, incorporating the expanded use of alcohol interlocks, and also the new referral programs as well. So there's referral programs in Queensland, both for first-time driving offenders and people who are higher range. So that option came through some MAIC funding. We funded the Cooperative and Autonomous Vehicle Pilot, which was conducted here in Queensland, both in Ipswich and also the Zoe 2 autonomous vehicle, and CASQ research were heavily involved in that. We're a collaborator on the Transport Academic Partnership, which TMR coordinate, and it looks at probably more of the engineering side of TMR's business. MAIC is involved in that. The 3 universities, well, there are 4 universities, Sunny Coast, UQ, Griffith, and QUT, and we've put in a bit of a safety lens into that, and some of the some projects have come through that, both from Sunny Coast Uni and CASQ have been involved in doing work in that space through the Transport Academic Partnership. And we're also a contributor to the Motorcycle Protective Clothing Assessment Program, or MotorCAP, which operates in Australia now and New Zealand. Mentioned earlier, we also provided funding to establish the Road Safety Data Bureau, and this was done in 2019. It's the first of its kind, whilst there's others operating in other jurisdictions, in particular in New South Wales. It's the first bureau and cross agency that's actually co-located. So we've got people from TMR Police, MAIC and Queensland Health through the JTI, who basically all work in the same office. And the other great thing about it is they bring their insights. They bring the insights from their organisation and also bring the expertise around their data. And it's been running now for about 6 years. MAIC recently in 2023, we provided an additional 5-year commitment around that. And the scope of the Bureau includes conducting key research. The key one is around facilitating that data linkage, and a really exciting development that has occurred recently is for the first time, an MOU has been able to be signed with Queensland Health, and so we'll actually be able to get an end-to-end process. So people will get the health data, we'll get MAIC's CTP data, the police data, and TMR data as well, and be able to look at that end-to-end process. As the point below outlines, from crash, hospital admission, police, ambulance, and CTP, and one of the things that will allow us to do is to look at people who actually don't come into our scheme, and actually look at people who don't report their crash to the police. So we're going to pick up, we already know we pick up more cyclists or motorcyclists, and probably people who don't want to self-incriminate themselves. So if you're involved in a crash, don't report it. Basically, don't make a claim to our scheme because they're driving impaired, they're driving without a license, they're doing something risky, so they basically report to hospital. So I'll be able to get an idea of those as well. And some of the reports to date that have come from the Bureau, they've done some analysis around motorcycles, older drivers, impaired driving, and out-of-scope fatalities as well. So we're talking about the suicides that are happening on the road network. We get a bit of a feel for some circumstances around them. So already the Bureau has been kicking a lot of goals, and we expect over the next 5 years that will only increase. The other thing that came, this is a good example of data and access to data, and we've always spoken about the fatal 5, but up until about 3 years ago, within our scheme, we were never actually able to quantify it to any extent. And I'll put a bit of a disclaimer around this. With this data, we have to be a little bit careful around it, because obviously a couple of things, as we've mentioned, we're only getting people where we can identify someone's at fault. So we're only getting a subsection of the data. And the other thing around it is we're only talking about the crashes here where the police actually probably attend. So people will report a crash to police as part of the claim, but when we're talking about being detected for drink driving, drug driving, that's the crashes where police attended and actually identified that person who was impaired or doing any of these other offences. So, but as you can see, whilst we call it the fatal 5, when you look at each of these across our scheme and you can compare it to the average claim where we exclude them, each of them are higher. And you can see, with restraints, we're talking about almost double. If someone's not properly restrained, we're talking about a claim value that's almost double. Same as alcohol, 189, the drugs, right up there as well, almost double, and speed. So once again, anyone who says that that message that speeding or any of these behaviours aren't dangerous. It's certainly not only are they causing fatalities, they're causing more serious injuries and larger claims for us. Moving along to our partnership with the Queensland Police. So MAIC, our partnership with police is probably more practical, and for several years now, we've been funding additional on-road enforcement hours. And you can see there in 22-23, almost 30,000 additional hours were undertaken by police through MAIC funding, which resulted in 10,000 traffic infringement notices, 262 RBTs and 3,400 RDTs happening, which wouldn't have happened. And basically what we do is we fund overtime for the police, and then they undertake the enforcement activities through that. We fund research position within the road safety policing command to boost their internal research capacity. We also fund we've funded some additional automatic number plate recognition technology, and that delivered an additional 27,000 operational hours in 22-23. And when you think about it from MAIC's point of view, any vehicle that's unregistered has a twofold effect. One, we're not actually getting that revenue in because people aren't registering the vehicle, so it's not coming through to the insurer. The other thing around it is if people aren't being insured, then it becomes a cost. If someone is injured through that driver, it becomes a cost on the non-offender, and that also increases costs within our scheme. So by funding those ANPR technology, not only are we detecting people who are unregistered, and we know the higher risk of crash with that as well, we're also making sure that revenue is coming back into our scheme. We also funded a tire deflation device pilot for police, looking at how they can, if they have to apprehend a vehicle, they can do it in a safe way. We've done some targeted initiatives around high-risk motorcycles, and we've recently done something in Townsville where they identified most of what they call a triangle area of crashes and looked at the circumstances around that. Pleased to say that it's preliminary, but it looks like police done some enforcement in the area, and that's certainly dropped the number of crashes and the infringements in that space. So hopefully that's something that the police can use in the future to deliver similar initiatives. And we've recently also funded a senior tactician position within the police, and that will basically coordinate the enforcement approach across the entire state. And when you think about the police at the moment and the resourcing issues that they have, anything that they can do to maximise where they use those resources can only be a good thing from a road safety point of view. I mentioned the Breaking the Cycle program earlier. This is really something that we're really proud of our collaboration with PCYC, and it was a really good. I think it's a really good sort of prototype of how to do something. So PCYC approached this. It was actually Mary Sheehan, the initial director of CASQ, basically recommended that someone from PCYC come along and have a meeting with us. We had a meeting. We thought this looks pretty good, but we need some more information on. We came back to CASQ. We got some more research around the learner driver mentor programs, how they best operate. CASQ actually did a best practice guideline for us in this space. So we were actually able to circulate that widely, but also give it to PCYC. PCYC were then able to look at how their program at the time, which was in its infancy compared to others, and then they were able to implement some of the recommendations that came from the CASQ research, and basically it's helped morph into what it is today. So MAIC has been, it's a learner driver mentor program. It provides assistance to disadvantaged people to obtain the 100 hours necessary to obtain their licence. So in Queensland in 2019, we introduced enhancements to the graduated licensing scheme. One of them was around the 100 hours. But what the research told us after a couple of years was there were some people, disadvantaged people, was creating issues for them because they didn't have access to a suitable supervisor, didn't have access to a suitable vehicle. And so you put a combination of someone who's disadvantaged, maybe not have the best role model in their life. What are they going to do? They're probably just going to drive a car without being properly trained. And we know what the research tells us about that in regards to crash risk and serious injury. So MAIC started providing our funding to PCYC from 2017. We expanded our funding in 2020, which allowed that we're now operating, I think it's about 38 sites across the state. And just looking at some of the key metrics, we recently got the report in a couple of days ago. So to June 2024, through our funding, we've delivered over 317,000 driving hours. It was 50,000 in the last financial year. 13,000 participants have come through the program. And we've had 5,582 licences, with 752 in the last financial year alone. So I think, that's perhaps some of these people obtain a licence, perhaps they don't, but I think those figures are really, really outstanding. We've all, given the success of the Breaking the Cycle program, we've also now working with PCYC, what they call the First People Certificate, the Changing Gears program. And we're operating that in three remote communities at the moment: Natron, Palm Island and Yarrabah. And in 23-24, through these, we had 9 new licences and 15 learners permits. And when you think that a lot with this program, they basically start right at the beginning. A lot of the people who participate in this program don't even have identification documents. And so the program works the way all through that, getting people a birth certificate, all the way through to helping them get their learners permit and getting their licence. And when you think about a lot of them don't even speak English, so there's all the different languages, indigenous languages out there, the program's adapted to all that. So once again, that's another significant outcome that PCYC have been able to do. We've also worked over the last 3 or 4 years, we worked with the Queensland Trucking Association on several initiatives. At the moment, we're working on what we call the First On Scene pilot, and that's basically we're providing training to 100 heavy vehicle drivers. We know Queensland being a vast state, we know that a lot of and heavy vehicle drivers access the state to deliver goods. They often come across accidents in remote communities, and often first aid or emergency services probably won't be able to attend that for several hours. So what the program is doing is training 100 heavy vehicle drivers, basically providing some skills to manage, I suppose, an incident, and also to help them administer first aid until that sort of help can arrive. We also did we mentioned earlier around tailgating being such a big problem in our scheme, and we know that tailgating around heavy vehicles is even more of an issue. Obviously, we identified some crashes where people are basically cutting in front of a heavy vehicle, braking suddenly, the heavy vehicle runs into them. Not a good outcome, have higher claim costs. So we funded these billboards, which have gone around the state on the back of these heavy vehicles, around the importance of leaving an appropriate gap around heavy vehicles. We also did an earlier pilot around looking at fatigue in the heavy vehicle industry, looking at piloting some equipment around, so basically some eye tracking equipment. If the driver looked away from the road or distracted on their phone for 3 or 4 seconds, that would trigger a warning. It was in the cabin and also to the company as well. And so that was a way of, a practical approach. From that, the pilot was successful, and some of the companies have actually installed that equipment into their fleet as well, which is great. We've also partnered with a number of local governments. We've done some work with the Sunshine Coast Council around rear-end crashes. We identified a couple of roads up there in particular. We had higher claim frequency than in other areas, and we piloted some use of some technology and some VMS around there, which proved to be successful. And once again, the council have us continuing to use that, which is great. We've also worked with the Gold Coast City Council and Logan City Council around looking at enhancing some modelling technology that they can use to look at the network, the local government network, which they look after, the roads they look after. The Gold Coast project in particular was successful in following that. One thing that they were actually able to identify, which is, as we know, is really difficult in road safety, is the near misses. And they identified in particular one scenario, they had this equipment at a roundabout, and they were able to actually identify a fault in the design of the roundabout. Obviously, that had some people calling up and saying there'd been issues, but by having the actual cameras there, they were actually able to see it themselves. And from that, they actually changed the design of the roundabout. And they also got that, they purchased that equipment with the company and put it in 20 additional sites after we funding. We've also done a similar pilot on that, same company at Logan City Council. That one's coming to an end, but from our understandings today on the preliminary data, it looks like similar outcomes will be realised there as well. The Department of Justice, once again in the First People space, we've over the last few years we've funded some Indigenous identification and licensing musters. The idea behind this is we're funding a pilot. It's being administered through Justice by the Queensland Indigenous Family Violence Legal Service. We've had some muster activities which have been held in those remote communities in Sabo Island, Thursday Island and Wagamar. And that one's going to wrap up at the end of the year. Once again, our intent around that funding the pilot is to provide that evidence base on which Justice can take going forward. So when they look at their future budgetary process, hopefully they can get a couple of positions and get the funding to keep those musters going into the future. So the other major change which has happened in MAIC probably in the last two years is our Insurance Commissioner, Neil Singleton. He's also now the CEO of what we call the National Injury Insurance Scheme in Queensland. And so basically the difference between the scheme is the NISCU scheme was established in 2016 and it provides lifetime treatment, care and support for those injured in serious road trauma, serious injury. So we're talking here about catastrophic injury, lifetime injury. We're talking predominantly around brain injury and spinal cord injury. And whilst people in the past could access compensation through the CTP scheme, they were often, they'd obviously get a settlement, they were often left to their own devices. What the NISCU scheme does is it provides them with a case manager who basically helps them through that process. And it's not about giving them money, it's about giving them access to those services. And so, as it stands at the moment, I think there's about since 2016, we've already got 500 people within that scheme. And so going forward, whilst we always be looking at MAIC, and obviously with our funding, we're concerned with our scheme, it does also change our approach a little bit because we also are looking at how we can, if we're reducing road trauma generally, we're also reducing people who could end up being a participant in that NISCU scheme. And the other thing around the NISCU scheme, the difference between it and MAIC, is it actually picks up, it's actually no fault. So you pick up people. So if you have the example of someone who's say you've got a single rider or a single driver, they have a crash, no one else is involved, they end up with one of these catastrophic injuries, they can actually access that support for the rest of their lives. And what we're actually finding within that scheme is 25% of the participants are motorcyclists. And when you think about registrations, so motorcyclists in Queensland probably sit about 4 or 5% of total registrations. You've got 25% of participants in this scheme needing lifetime care and support of motorcyclists. And it's really sad when you think, looking at some of the cases, we've got people who are 17 or 18 years old who are going to need that support for the rest of their lives. And you think about the impacts on their families, but you also think about, if they live to they're 80 years old, think about the cost of that on that scheme. So it's really, really significant. So it has changed whilst we always will remain focused on MAIC and our scheme, it's also something that has changed the way that we're thinking about things, and something like motorcycles, which in our scheme was always an issue, but not as much, because I think in the first slide we looked at 6%, because a lot of the time it's more the pillion passenger, single ride, which is if a motor vehicle involves more the pillion passenger, if it's a single rider, we wouldn't have had that claim previously. So in regards to future focus opportunities, I could have put up 4 slides around this, to be honest, but obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we aren't the lead agency, so we really need to continue to work closely and effectively with police and TMR. The Queensland Road Safety Strategy and Action Plan is an overarching plank of what we look to do in our program. The Queensland Road Safety Research Collaboration, probably never heard of that term before, but it's what we're looking to do going forward with our research. So we're going to have a model of several universities. We're going to have QUT, we're going to have Sunshine Coast University, and we're looking to establish something at Griffith University as well. The idea around it is look at how we can really maximise our research collaborations, how we can look at those universities working closely together, partnering, collaborating on Commonwealth government grant opportunities, even opportunities for different staff from those universities to work together on things, obtain expertise in different spaces. The other major thing will also be around was TMR set up a new process in regards to under the Road Safety Action Plan around how they look at their funding. They've got several different boards. One of them is called the Research and Evaluation Advisory Group. But it's also around, with this collaboration, how we can better feed up the outcomes that are coming. There's a lot of good research that's being done. I think a lot of the time, maybe TMR and police aren't as aware of it as they can be. So that'll be another key thing of this collaboration is how we best make them aware of what is actually happening at the moment. I touched on this in the previous slide. The MAIC collaboration provides additional context in road safety in terms of, with that road trauma, how we can mitigate people and the number of participants going into that new scheme. We've also got the challenges that are happening at the moment in the world, the economic conditions, recidivist offenders, the rising road toll. When you think about economic conditions, for us, from MAIC, people can't afford to register their vehicles and they run a risk. So, they cause an accident, they're involved in an accident, that has one impact that probably not a lot of people are aware of. I'm just saving money on our money in the government. I'm not going to register my car and they don't realise the impacts that it could have on them. The recidivist drivers, we know not only the youth crime, but we know there's a significant issue with the road toll at the moment and a lot of it is around it's around people with extensive criminal histories. It's around people with, when we've done some analysis with Angela Watson around the spur data, we can see that and Ione as well around, the way people live their life is just an extension of the road. So we've got a real problem there. And as I said, whilst our scheme is relatively stable, the road toll since COVID, since 2019, when we had the record lowest road toll in Queensland, is continuing to rise. So that always remains a challenge. And that was it from me.
Now, do we have any questions? Matthew?
Can I ask if the Fatal 5 slide that you had, were those categories mutually exclusive?
They were, yes. But as I said, they were mutually exclusive of all other. So basically, they look at that particular element of the Fatal 5 mutually exclusively, but they compare it to the subsection of the ones that aren't in that category. And as I said, it is a subsection of data. We do have to be careful because, as I said, police don't attend all crashes, identify those things. And the other thing is we're only looking at people where we can identify someone at the back. So we have to be a little bit careful with those figures, but I still think they're strong enough. They provide a strong enough base in which you can see the impacts that those behaviours do.
Would you have data on the injury types and their total claim costs, like a brain injury is costing X amount? And I saw the 70 million a day there. Was that national or Queensland?
I think that's national, yeah.
Got to be because of
I think that was from the CASQ document. Yeah. It might have been the CASQ infographic. I think that's national.
That's national.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we do have that. There is some information on our website around. We have an insights report on our website, and it breaks down like all the different body types of what our claims relate to. And I think from us, 52% of our claims are. So that's that. When you think about the rear end crash, the whiplash, that's our predominant. So whilst they're probably with whiplash, they're not big claims. They happen so frequently, but with our probably biggest ones are the brain and stuff. Yeah. We'd have sort of some insights around the cost. something I can get for you.
Yes, please.
Anybody else? Sharon?
The QPS data that you showed there, in terms of the additional enforcement that you're providing, how was that determined? Did you use some research to determine the number of, or the amount of funding for the number of overtime hours?
Yeah, we just work with, well, basically what is probably a simple answer is police basically identified a certain amount of money, and then so basically we provide that money, and then as I say, they use that to pay overtime, and then they work out. They've changed the strategy a little bit over the last couple of years. Sometimes they've done target initiatives and looked at certain things, or a school holiday period or something like that, like additional stuff, and some of it is just a random element of it as well. So,
I have one. I noticed you said that there was some research being done about regional fatalities. I don't know whether you can answer or someone else can answer about whether that's showing up links to road conditions in the regional areas at all. Is there any way that's being captured?
No, probably not at the moment. Like I think what we know in our schemes, obviously, we have 75% of our claims, to be honest, probably in the south, which makes sense. It's all about frequency, number of cars on the road, exposure. But when they do occur in regional areas, they're often a lot higher because for the high speeds, as you say, the roads, probably aging vehicles as well, all that sort of stuff, the safety features. So they're often higher. And the other thing is obviously it can be delayed getting access to the treatment as well.
Is that data actually available out in the public at all, or is it just
depending on it depends on exactly what you're after. Like if we could, it's dependent. I could have a chat. Exactly.
We should have that on the screen. Marcus has said he completed the heavy vehicle course and is delivering real value to the industry.
Oh, great.
There's a question from Stuart. How is the funding set up for the PCYC? Does MAIC get involved in the use, or leave it to the PCYC to manage?
So no, we do get it. So basically, when it originally started, we looked at across the state where our claim frequencies were, and then that was how we sort of, I suppose, looked at our initial prioritisation. But probably in the last round of funding, probably moved to, obviously we knew our areas were being thing, but we probably want to expand the program as well, just to provide that access to getting people to a licence. The other thing, Stuart, is obviously you'd be aware as well is TMR provides the funding for that program too through their community grants program, and so obviously MAIC and TMR work together with PCYC to make sure there's no duplication of funding around.
Thank you. So you mentioned that CTP premiums differ according to type of vehicle registered. So my question has to do with the SUVs. So are you thinking maybe to use this different CTP premium to kind of discourage the people buying SUVs?
No, it's not something we've really thought about. As I said, we probably we have that 26 classes, but we never really thought about breaking it down. It probably hasn't been enough for us to break between like a standard car and SUV, to be honest. Like our breakdowns probably use and all of that sort of. We have a category for that. We have a category for motorcycles, rideshare, taxis, heavy vehicles. We never really sort of thought of that. To be honest, it probably hasn't been enough in it. Yeah.
So you can't differentiate with the kind of Rams and American size trucks that are coming in now from.
We have in regards to heavy vehicles, I think we have about 3 classes. So we do have.
No, I mean pickup trucks. The overgrown utes that we're getting now.
I think we would, yeah. It would just depend on how. A lot of it depends on how they're registered as well, like with GMR. But yes, I think we would be able to group one of those classes. They would fit into one of them, and obviously that would determine the premium that we pay. And as I said, a lot of it's on actuarial. So we work really closely with the state actuary's office. They look at all of our claims data, and that's a really important part of the premium process that I sort of spoke about on the first slide. The actuaries look at it if there's particular trends happening in a particular class. So, for example, motorcycles. If we had a spike in motorcycle injuries, what that would mean is when we go to that class, we would raise the premium to better reflect what the risk relativity is. And that's what, in the good example of that is so it's not in our scheme, but when you think about the NISQ levy is part of, so when people register their vehicle, the NISQ levy forms part of that as well, part of that process. And so the motorcycles, their levy has gone up substantially in the last couple of years to reflect that overrepresentation of people as participants in that scheme.
But for the big SUVs, if it is people outside the vehicle that they are injuring pedestrians, cyclists, then that's less likely to show up in your scheme. Is that right?
Well, no. If a pedestrian's run over by an SUV, then basically they're the claimant, and so the at-fault party would be the SUV. So when we do an analysis on the at-fault party, that would show up. Yeah. So that's how I suppose we look at it: is you've got the at-fault vehicle, and then you've got the claimant. So when we're looking at risk relativity, we're looking at the at-fault vehicle, looking at the people who are causing the crashes and the sort of vehicles